Welcome to Life Her Podcast, the podcast that guides you from the 9-to-5 grind to the freedom of your own path. Discover how to conquer life's challenges while pursuing your passions with unwavering faith. Because being an entrepreneur is not easy. So let's get to it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yvette Lloyd, host of Life Her Podcast. I would like to welcome you guys to an amazing episode that we have coming up. I would like to dive into the journeys, the struggles, the success, and entrepreneurs who are making an impact while creating the life that truly they desire. Today, we have an incredible guest, Jeremy Shapiro. Jeremy is a serial entrepreneur, mentor, and business strategist. With the deep passion of his help for business owners break free from the cycle of overwork and step into their true entrepreneur freedom. For over 2 decades, Jeremy has guided entrepreneurs in transitioning from solopreneurs to business owners, showing them how to scale cash flow and even sell their businesses while working less and making more. He has been featured on NPR, Fox News, ABC, NBC, Market Watch, and many more. And today, he's here to share his wisdom with us. So in this episode, we will discuss so many different things, and I am excited about everything. And hi, Jeremy, how are you?
I'm outstanding. Thanks for inviting me on the show. This is great.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you. I was looking at all of the things that you were just so giving us so much wisdom about, and I just got excited, honestly, because I myself has been an entrepreneur for 17 years. And since me doing podcasting and meeting individuals like you, and you guys have helped me scale my business in a ways that I couldn't even imagine, and even just myself overall. So I really appreciate you being on.
Love it. Well done. Well done.
So first and foremost, I like to ask you, what inspired you to focus on helping entrepreneurs transition from solopreneurship and to their true business ownership?
Yeah. So my entire career has, been not only working for myself and having my own businesses, but all those businesses have been in the service of other entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship has been so meaningful for me in my life, and being able to help others see those same results and grow themselves is so impactful. Entrepreneurship allows you to get control of your time, right? And how you spend that time. So when we talk about entrepreneurial freedom, what we really mean is having agency and say in how you spend your time on this earth, in this life, right? So that can be putting more time in with your family, giving back in your community, launching new businesses, building your current business, but you get to choose how you spend that time. And that is just so powerful.
It is extremely powerful. And when someone is in a beginning process of scaling their business and trying to get everything, their ducks in a row, can you explain to them how important it is to not spend the money that you're making into your personal life, but put it back into your business?
Yeah. So there's 2 really important pieces to that question, right? One is obviously this danger of like what you call like commingling your funds, right? You don't want to be using your business money for, your personal things. Those are 2 separate worlds, right? 2 separate categories of expenses. But really, where I think we're going on this is this idea of reinvesting in your business to grow, right? Versus taking out all that profits and starving that business. And there's a balance between those. If we step back and ask ourselves, like, what is, the purpose of our business, right? There's a lot of altruistic things we can say about that. And look, when we have a business, we can provide jobs and employment for others, right? We can provide a service in our community or in the world at large. We can solve big problems, right? We can do all kinds of great things. But at the end of the day, if the business isn't making money, right, then it can't afford to grow and take care of itself. So we need to make sure, obviously, that the business has money. That being said, one difference I see as I work with folks going from being a solopreneur to truly scaling the business up is how we look at the finances in the company, right? If we look at your business as an income producing asset, right? So think of that like anything else that can generate passive income for you, whether it be, your mutual funds, your stocks, investment, real estate, and so on, right? You have an asset and you would like that to produce some income for you. So if you're working, 90 hours a day, 17 days a week, right? And then we look at what you're making while you're doing that. Oftentimes you're making below minimum wage, and yet you have all that responsibility and liability that comes with owning a business. For our listeners who are familiar with Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow quadrant, right? He talks about these 4 different quadrants that we have on our journey from being an employee to self-employed to a business owner and finally an investor, right? Well, the chasm between the self-employed and business owner is massive. So how do we figure out where we are? Well, how much time can you step away from your business and come back to a business still running and growing, right? For many business owners and almost all solopreneurs, you can't step away for a day or maybe even a week, let alone a month or a quarter and so on, right?
So true.
When you can, it means not only can you financially afford to do that, it means the roles in the business are all taken up by other people who you can afford to pay to do those roles, and you have the systems in place and so on and so forth. There's a whole checklist of things that are required to get you there. But the bigger takeaway is you have a true business when you are making money from the profits of the business, and that business is able to run independently of you. Not because you can't work in the business, but you don't have to.
That is like extremely true. And honestly speaking, like on my personal experience, I have daycare center, and then I end up branching off to open up another daycare center. And it had given me leeway to stay away from one, but focus on the other. And it's like a catch-22 though, because sometimes things can go backwards and you could find yourself, I wouldn't say failing, but lacking a lot of different things when it comes to the growth and you having different staff. Cause I had like 32 staff, and it becomes a lot, it becomes a lot. And actually having a great team and having them have the expertise in certain areas so that you can, maneuver the way you want to, but scale your business to another level. And it can become very difficult and very extremely overwhelming at the same time. But I think one of my things what I had lacked because I wasn't educated enough is hiring the correct people in different areas. And that's huge.
It's interesting when you're talking about having multiple locations. When there's a business that you are just present at every day, you're not always aware of all the things you're doing, right? And all those little stop gaps you have in place because you're there.
Yes.
Even though you create the systems, things can still fall back to you. When you have the 2 locations, you can try and go between the 2, right? So now you're dependent upon people and systems, but you're still able to spend half a day at each location. Once you get to that 3rd, right, or beyond, now your systems and people are truly to the test. And now you know if you've got a business that can run and grow on its own, or if it really is blocking on you.
Man, isn't that the truth? Many entrepreneurs struggle with working in their business instead of on it. What are some of the biggest mindset shifts needed to break that cycle?
So we talked about how to grow from being just a solopreneur. You need systems, you need people, right? So in order to do that, though, we need to recognize what are the different roles we have within our own business. As a solopreneur, we wear all of the hats. We do all the things. And that's okay. We've all been there, right? To scale up, though, we need to identify what those roles are and then create the systems for those. And that lets us then hire for those different roles. So commonly, most of these blocks come down to mindset. And the 2 most common mindset shifts that are needed to grow come down to these 2, right? One is if you have a perfectionist mentality, or you think no one can do things as well as you can, then that is a really self-limiting belief, because that's going to force you to end up doing all the jobs, forever be correcting someone else who's trying to do it, and avoid creating the systems that others can use to get the same result, right? So if we can recognize the downfall and flaws with perfectionism and understand the benefits and why we feel that way, that's a first step. So we understand that obviously the perfectionist mentality comes from us having our name on the thing we're delivering, right? We have pride around what we're putting forward. We want that to be a great experience for the customer. And that comes from the right place. That's a good thing. So at no point am I advocating for giving up on quality, right? So you can maintain a high level of quality. We just need to define that, right? Once we define success, or we define what the output of the system looks like, now we can have someone else use that system. When we have someone use our system, there's only 3 directions that can go, right? In the beginning, someone's going to use your system and not get the result you want, and you'll realize what your system is missing. You'll recognize that what you thought was obvious or was unsaid needed to be clarified. And so you revise your system. It's an iterative process. And so we dial that in. That moves us towards output number 2, or outcome number 2. And that is your system getting the result that you want. That's great. That's our ideal. And over time, what we'll see is the third possibility, which is you get an outcome you don't want, not because the system is wrong, but because a team member wasn't following or using the system. And that's just a matter of coaching and retraining, right? So we create the system, we iterate and revise it, and we get that running, and then we manage it. And now we know that there's an output that matches the quality standards that you are proud to put your name on, yet it's not dependent upon you doing it, right? So that gets us past that one big mindset shift we need to make, which is no one can do things as well as you can. In fact, as you grow, one of my favorite pieces of advice around hiring is, if you can hire people who are smarter or better at you in the things that need to get done, that's like a double win. Not only aren't you doing it, but the quality is even better. So be looking for those opportunities. Right. And the second,
but that's difficult, Jeremy, because you have to literally trust people too, because you could bring someone in that could run your whole business the way you would like them to, the way you do it. But at the same time, it's like the betrayal or the trust will kick in, and the anxiety, and a lot of times us as business owners, we've been through a lot of things. We may have lost friends along the way. We may even have business partners in the beginning, and they end up drifting off. And, that develops a lot of rebuilding when it comes to you actually trusting to reach those levels. Like, what advice do you have with someone that are traumatized for dealing with different relationship parts and bonding when it comes to that, so that they can scale their business? Because you can't be the only one to do it. You need you need a team to build it. But how can they heal from that to be able to scale it?
I mean, if you think about, where you meet your life partner, right? Is it the first person you meet and you decide to date, and that's like the perfect fit, right? Or do you, over time, figure out what that right fit is for you, and then you realize you found someone incredible, right? When I look at roles that, we've hired for, as we dial in our hiring pipeline, our best practices, and, our red flags and green flags and all of this for hiring, at the end of the day, you make the best decision you can, and you're going to learn from it. And not every hire I've ever made has been, a home run. And that's okay, because until we get those at-bats, to poorly use a sports analogy here, right? We don't get that opportunity to find that, that home run win. So it comes down to trusting the process, right? The outcome won't always be perfect, but we've got to trust and refine and work on the process. There's a wonderful book I love all around decision-making. And one of the big concepts that comes out of that is this decoupling of grading and judging our decision-making process versus the outcome, right? So when someone has a poor decision-making process, they make a bad decision and get a bad outcome. We all saw that coming, and that was obviously not going to turn out well, right? On the other side, when someone puts a lot of effort into making a really, really intentional decision and gets a good outcome, we all say, yeah, well deserved. You did a good job. That was a great decision. So those 2 corners of that quadrant are obvious. The other 2 quadrants are much more difficult. And that's when you see someone who makes really bad decisions, and yet somehow there's a good outcome, right? This is the person who drives home drunk and makes it okay, because there was a good outcome that self-reinforces bad decision-making, right? This is the entrepreneur, who hired, someone they barely knew on a whim, and it worked out really well. Good outcome, bad decision-making, right? The other quadrant is almost more difficult to deal with. And that's when you have a really good decision-making process, but a bad outcome. Because human nature we judge our decision-making process on that outcome. And so we now think our process was flawed because we had a bad outcome. All this comes down to risk mitigation. So when we look at that hiring process, right, we're going to have some hires that are not perfect, and that's okay, right? We hire slow, fire fast. Because by going through that process, you will find amazing team members that you have no idea how you found them at the time you did and that it worked out so perfectly. But you need the at-bats. You need to start trusting, right? And gradually, trust more as you go, and you will find amazing team members out there who want to help you build that business and who want to run things for you.
Yeah. So, as someone who has been an entrepreneur since 1998, how has your definition of success evolved over the years?
It's so funny when we talk about definition of success. It's a question I love to ask others, right? Whether it's asking, my kids about the definition of success for a family trip, right? Whether it's about asking a friend about their definition of success for, an evening out, whether it's asking, a potential hire about their definition of success, a vendor, a customer, whatever it is. It's such a powerful question to ask about how you define success, because sometimes we'll find our definition and someone else's definition are vastly different, right? So for some entrepreneurs, they may define success by grow, grow, grow. They may define it as, a $1 billion exit, right? They may define it by a head count of having, 1,000 employees or 12 locations or whatever, right? And it's important everyone's on the same page about how we define what that success is, because if not, you may find that two people are working against each other at odds or in opposite directions while they're both pursuing wholeheartedly and enthusiastically a very different definition of success. So for me, I think, as I look at my career and the evolution, I still remember early on, my wife and I, when we first met, we were on one of our earlier dates, and here I was getting to know this amazing woman sitting across the table from me. And I would kind of be glancing at my cell phone from time to time. And I needed to know, was a client looking for me? Did something need my attention? And even though here I was in the evening, quote, off hours, but you're an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And half tuned in to this incredible woman who I had no idea, years later, we'd be married, have a family, and, living the dream, as it were, right? And I realized in that moment that I was dividing my attention, and I did not need to be doing that. Because what was the purpose of having my business if it wasn't to allow me to have the life that I wanted to create? So it was almost like a switch flipped. I did not look at that phone again. And in fact, I stopped looking at emails or messages or answering the phone off hours. And wouldn't you know, clients got retrained pretty quickly, and they respected it, and there was no downside. The upside was I could truly be offline. And when I was outside of work, I could be fully present with the people I was with and tuned into whatever it is I was doing wholeheartedly. So for me, that was sort of that beginning of that shift of defining success, right? And realizing this whole idea of entrepreneurial freedom is giving you that choice to decide how to spend your time and where to reinvest that time, whether it's hobbies, family, friends, community, nonprofit work, launching new businesses, or reinvesting in your own business. It just means you have the choice to do that.
Man, that speaks volume, because that's where I'm at right now. And I realized that the same things you were doing, I was doing the same thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, something is not right. I have to shift it over. But you'll be surprised how good it feels once you get to that point, and you be so serious about it. You won't let anyone break you to go backwards.
It's so freeing. I had a client I was working with who was a solopreneur, had a hardware business with hardware in retail stores. And this was a guy who loved to mountain bike, right? Loved being outdoors in the mountains, in nature, right? It was restorative to him. It wasn't just good for his health. It was great for his physical health and mental health, right? That's also where he got space to come up with the ideas for what's next in the business. It was such a good thing to be away from the business and out in the mountains. But wouldn't you know, there's not a whole lot of cell phone coverage there. And it's his own business, got his name and his brand all tied up in this. And so he stopped going out to the mountains because of the fear of what would happen if one of his customers needed him and he wasn't able to be there and he wasn't available. So Now he was just pouring all of his time into the business and always there, 24/7, ready for anything, which sure, his customers did appreciate that, but the business was not growing how he wanted it to be growing. His mental and physical health were suffering. And it was just not a great space. So one of the
Wow.
first things we did was help him to define one of those roles and realize that this role was the frontline customer service. So like, look, you can insource these things like hire an employee, right? You can work with a third-party company to fulfill things for you. You can work with freelancers, right? There's many ways to cover a role in your business. So in this case, we found, an overseas freelancer to work from full-time, right? So 40 hours a week, business hours, to answer the phone, to respond to customer emails, customer chats, all those things, right? And this now freed him up during that 9 to 5 to, yes, get back out into the mountains and get back on the bike and get back to nature. But it also let him work on like product roadmap. It also let him do that really important thing all businesses need, especially new businesses, getting out there and doing sales and growing the business, right? All these other roles in the business that he was being pulled away from, he can now put his time back into. So the health and wellness part came back and the business was able to grow. And wouldn't you know it, he had doubled the size of his company from a headcount just by bringing on that first critical key hire. And that, of course, you can scale and grow. And a lot of the stuff that I do is iterative. You can repeat this and do it again and get an incremental result, and do it again and get an incremental result. So for him, that first big hire really opened the door to the possibilities.
Wow. So, with you actually helping him and witnessing that, now mastermind groups, have they played a big role in your work, and what makes them so powerful for your business owners?
Oh my gosh. So like this journey of entrepreneurship that we're all on, it can be a lonely adventure at times, right?
Yeah.
Like those who are not on that similar journey like we are, don't appreciate the challenges we face on that, on that pathway towards our entrepreneurial freedom, right? They just see the outward signs of success that business owners have, but they don't realize just how hard we work in those challenges we face and what we have to overcome every step of the way. So when you're able to surround yourself with like-minded entrepreneurs, right? Growth focused, lifelong learners who are in the trenches doing the hard work of running a business, not only do you get people who can help you to get unblocked and solve the challenges that you're facing in your business, you also find people who can celebrate you and acknowledge all that you've done and all that you've overcome and all those big wins that you have, right? Because when things are going not so great in business, right? Do you talk to your employees about that? Do you talk to your spouse, your kids, your friends, your vendors? Who do you talk to about that stuff? Right? On the flip side, when things are going really well, how do you have those conversations, right? When you have stakeholders in the game, right? Vendors want to change prices or credit terms based on if you're doing well or not so well, right? Those who rely on you financially are worried about how any of this impacts them, both the good and the bad, right? Employees polish those resumes when things are tough at times, right? Or look for raises when things are going great. Like everyone is not exactly unbiased. But when you have a mastermind of other entrepreneurs who are growth focused, lifelong learners, who are on that same journey, they are not invested the same way as everyone else is in your life, right? They want nothing but the best for you. They want to help you out, right? And you've got something to share too. We all have our own superpowers, our own area of expertise. But I would say like the biggest thing I find value-wise is that among the categories of knowledge, everyone who comes into a mastermind room brings in two things, right? One, we bring in our area of expertise, our superpowers, the things we're really good at. These are the things that just come naturally to us that others find difficult, right? So we're bringing in the things we know that we know. We also come into the room, and generally when folks find me, with something else. That's your big question, your big burning question, the thing that if you only had an answer to, you could get unblocked and move forward in business and life and so forth, right? So that is the thing we know that we don't know. And when we know that we don't know something, we can seek out answers, right? We can take courses, we can read books, we can seek out experts, we can ask questions, we can search online, we can find the answer to the question we know that we have. But the real value I see again and again in the group is from the biggest category of all, that third category of the things we don't know that we don't know. So how do we get the ideas for our new businesses? How do we learn about the pivots that are available in our own businesses? How do we get ideas for not just the ideas, but the resources, expertise on new sales channels, right? On new directions to go, without finding a way to expose ourselves to the ideas of what others are doing that they're willing to share behind closed doors of what's really going on in their business. So we can see the shortcuts based on the lessons, successes, and failures of others, get the resources based on the best practices of others who are willing to share those, right? And get the inspiration and idea for what I call the cross-pollination of ideas, where we see what's working in a different industry and we apply that within our own industry. And we have had so many incredible pivots. I've launched so many new businesses and seen new businesses launched within our groups just from those kinds of conversations. And that's not something you find in a book or in a course or from an expert or from a search online. That's what you find by intentionally putting yourself in that room with others on that same journey in a mastermind setting.
Man, that is so true. So what should someone look for when choosing a mastermind group?
Yeah, so there's a number of different kinds of groups, right? But the big thing you want to be looking for is you want to be looking for that fit. You want to know that this is the right group for you because of who is being curated to be in that room, right? So for example, if you're looking at starting a business, being in a room full of nine-figure entrepreneurs sounds great. But when you think about the lessons you're going to learn there, not all those are as applicable to you refining and starting a new business idea, right? And conversely, if you're running, an 8-figure business, being in a room full of folks who are just getting started with their solopreneurship, you may not get as much from that room as you could from a room of folks with similar, right, businesses at a similar phase in their journey, right, with a diverse range of experiences. So that's why, like, if you look at industry groups and you have all folks who are in the exact same industry, right, like you can get some ideas there, but you're hearing a lot of sort of the recycled things that everyone is doing, right? Mm-hmm. So like if you're a doctor and you go to a medical conference and meet and talk to all the doctors, you'll hear about everyone doing the same thing. Whereas when you're the only medical professional in a room of other business owners, that's where you get the industry pivoting, game-changing ideas that you can implement in your practice and really grow and differentiate, right? Mm-hmm. So look for that diversity. And then just in terms of like the makeup of the room, one of the things that we always screen for is we're looking for lifelong learners. So there's some scary stat, like the number of Americans who the last book they read was in high school. Like it is a very large chunk of our country that has not read a book since high school. Oh. And that's terrifying. Yeah, but are those the folks you want to hang around with? Or do you want to hang around with folks who themselves are continuing to better themselves, educate, they read books, right? They have ideas, they're looking to grow, right? And that's that second piece, is that you want folks who are growth focused, willing to share, right? Willing to get constructive criticism, right? And be open to receiving that, and are willing to engage in that sort of two-way conversation. So figure out what it is that you're looking for in that group. Those are some of my best practices that we look for. And then find out how you can, what we call test drive a group to see if it's a right fit for you. Obviously writing, a 5-6 figure check to join a group you don't know anything about isn't always the best move. I've done that, as have many others. And that can work out to varying degrees. But that's why, like, I'm always a fan of what we call the test drive. See how you can try out a group for a session and see if you're a fit for the group and if the group thinks you're a fit for the group as well.
Wow. So what are the key differences between mastermind group and traditional business coaching?
Yeah. So coaching, we'll sort of put that in two buckets, right? One is like the one-on-one coaching, and the other we'll put in the group coaching. And then we'll compare those to mastermind groups. Okay. So one-on-one coaching, you're working with a coach at your pace with whatever's going on in your business, right? And they're going to help you through whatever challenges you face and be there in your corner and, move you along individually, right? So you don't get that same exposure like we're talking about in a mastermind group to what everyone else is working on and what they're doing. You more get the tactical, direct help with whatever the challenges that you're facing of the day, right? And that's valuable. I've had business coaches for decades, and I find, value in that. It is vastly different than a mastermind group, right? Group coaching is going to be, a coach, a leader of that group with a cohort, right? Usually going through some coaching program altogether. So you're moving through some program, some curriculum at the pace the group is going, right? Some of it might apply to you, others it applies to others, and you'll learn sort of whatever the topic is that's being taught or covered. That may not be the most applicable thing to you, and you might have some time to ask your questions, but you also get to hear the other questions that other people are asking. But it's far less to not at all about others sharing what's going on in their business. A mastermind group, whether, what we call guru-led or peer-led, right, is going to have a lot of the time spent on what everyone else is doing in their business, right? Sharing what's working, what's not, where people need help, and so forth. So if you think about this, I like to think of it like a virtual laboratory of scientists out there running experiments in their own businesses, as we all do, right? And now reporting back on those best practices and the results and the failures, right? And the lessons learned. And you're getting to learn from all of that, not just about one business or one person's experience, right? But from this group that is doing experiments in their business every single day and sharing with you the outcomes. You now get to implement the best practices, avoid the pitfalls they found ahead of time for you, use the resources that are shared. And that is where I see so much value. I can share with you a quick story if you'd like about sort of that cross-pollination.
Sure. That was my next question.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So like from a cross-pollination standpoint, I remember we had one of our meetings and we had a brick and mortar retail store owner and we had an e-commerce store owner, right? Both these businesses were successful. They both had customers. They both had revenue. They both had teams, right? All the makings of a business. However, the way they got their customers was vastly different, right? So the e-commerce store owner talked in terms of email marketing, online pay-per-click advertising, earnings per click, right? All these different metrics that an online business that does email marketing would talk about.
Wow.
The retail store owner was talking about all their metrics that they looked at in terms of foot traffic in the store and revenue and how they were using direct mail to bring in new customers and so on, right? So just from this conversation of two business owners sharing their best practices, the retail store owner got to hear about the best practices of an online business, right? They got to ask questions and find out all about this email marketing that the e-commerce store was doing and take down some great notes and get answers to questions about what tools to use, what kinds of promotions to run, how to organize things, what to say, what works well, and so forth, right? Now, the e-commerce store owner looks at this retail store owner who's grown their business through direct mail and is asking questions around like, how do you find a list of who to market to and what kind of direct mail piece do you send out, right? And who do you use to send it out? Do you mail it yourself? Do you use a vendor? Do you use, all those things, right? So from this conversation, they're able to share and swap resources, right? They're able to share best practices and all these things. And between those 2 months meetings, right, the retail store owner came to report back the email marketing campaigns they did and how much money they got per email that they sent out, which is huge, right? This is a whole new sales channel they'd never used. And that e-commerce store owner came back and talked about their first ever direct mail campaign and how they got the list, knew what to say, got everything matched up, and had real results of new revenue from new customers who'd never heard of them before that were now customers. And it was such a beautiful thing to see this cross-pollination. Neither one of them was going out there and seeking answers to those questions, but just by being exposed to the best practices of others, they now had not just knowledge of something they didn't know existed, but the know-how, resources, confidence, and assistance to actually implement, execute, and get a result.
Wow. That is remarkable.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. And I'm not really big on e-commerce, but I think it's like extremely dope on how they like scale their businesses like that, especially online when people actually find your business and start purchasing and do everything. That takes a special person.
Yeah. And how cool is it if you could be in a room of folks who are doing that successfully,
Yes.
not waiting for your question of how do I, but just sharing what they're doing and giving you like a blueprint you can copy and implement in your business for a best practice.
Oh my gosh, that is like truly amazing. That is seriously. So please, as when you're not helping entrepreneurs, you love to travel and cycling. How do you balance your personal passions with your professional life?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I look at where I spend my time, obviously in my businesses and working with other business owners for sure. But if not that, it's, on my bike. I'm a road cyclist for our listeners who are curious, and with my family. Right. And the parallels between like parenting and running a business and cycling, like it's uncanny how much all these things have in common. So like, I constantly see those different parallels, which is a lot of fun. But the reality is there's a fair amount of crossover between these things too. If we look at our life as like these different compartments or silos, there's value in that because we can be solely focused on one of those at a time. And I'm an advocate for that. Right. But if we do allow those to bleed over a little bit, there's sometimes some really cool overlap, right? Involving the family in conversations about business, right? Can be, insightful and fun, right? Combining, being on bike rides with other entrepreneurs and founders, and we get to talk shop and talk business while we're out on our bikes is also really cool, right? And then of course that third, riding bikes with the family is always great too. So anyways, this idea of balance is good, but that implies that there's some right answer to what brings these scales in balance. And the shorter answer is that's different for all of us and it changes over time. I know I've certainly, faced feelings of guilt or questioning my own choices. But when I look at how much time I'd be spending with the family or doing things and then wondering like, am I putting enough time into the business? But also conversely felt that, draw of doing stuff in the business and wondering, should I be doing this thing with the family? Right. So is there ever a right answer to this? Well, you've got to do what feels right and be okay with that decision-making process.
That's true.
Because for our parents who are listeners, that you could put 24 hours a day into being the best parent you could be. And sometimes that's still not enough. Right. So if we understand that, we know we've already got to dial back from somewhere and be okay because it's never going to be enough. In the same way, we can also work 25 hours a day in our business. Right. And there will still be more to do at the end of the day. So we already know even giving every possible hour wouldn't be enough. We have to accept that it's going to be something less. So let's be intentional with how we spend that time in the business, right? For our listeners who've not used any sort of like time diary or time tracking, you'd be surprised how much of your business time you're wasting on busyness that's not actually productive or helpful towards the business, right? So we can be intentional about that. In the same way, if it's you're spending time with your family or on your hobbies, is that intentional time, right? Or you only half tuned into that, right? Or are you wasting that time? So if we're just intentional with how we spend that time between now and, whatever our last day is, then those can be, valuable hours, days, years, and so on. But we know at this point that it's a finite time period for all of us. We've all got a similar destination. Let's be intentional to how we spend the time between now and then.
Wow. So how can someone get in contact with you and have you help them scale their businesses?
Yeah, you can see a lot of the stuff that I work on over on LinkedIn. A lot of what I write about and publish is also over on bayareamastermind.com. That's BAYAREA mastermind.com. As we, have updates on the book that's coming out, that's all there. As we have new articles coming out, all that stuff that we're working on, we talk about over at bayareamastermind.com and of course also on my LinkedIn. So reach out and connect there. And for folks who are looking to test drive a mastermind, find out how to run a mastermind, want to figure out how to, grow from being a solopreneur to, an entrepreneur that has found that entrepreneurial freedom, that's the kind of stuff I love working on and I'm always happy to help. So reach out, do connect, and let's see if we can help you along the way.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jeremy. This was a very informative interview. I really appreciate you being on my show.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me on. Love the show and all that you're doing and, seeing your journey and the journeys of our listeners as well. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Life Her Podcast. Please do not forget to subscribe on YouTube and also listen to Life Her Podcast on all major platforms of audio. Thank you. Bye.
Welcome to Life Her Podcast, the podcast that guides you from the 9-to-5 grind to the freedom of your own path. Discover how to conquer life's challenges while pursuing your passions with unwavering faith. Because being an entrepreneur is not easy. So let's get to it.